Hey nerds, Pierogi Trash here. I have been a part of the DBD community for several months now, playing both as the killer and survivor. Along the way, I have been politely informed of my prior transgressions. I have been working with a legal team tirelessly to create the first unofficially official unofficial rules. Anyway, I'm going to share the top 5 rules with you today, just testing the waters. This is part 1, maybe there'll be a part 2. Let's hop into it. Provision 1.1. It is hereby prohibited to camp a hooked survivor within the multiverse of DBD. That being said, the main provision does have several exemptions in which protection or complying with the anti-hook camping clause is no longer applicable. First, we have exemption 1.2.a. During the endgame collapse, hook camping can become a strategy of an often desperate killer to secure a kill or create pressure in the final moments of a match. Exemption 1.2.b. Hook rushing survivors are not protected from this provision. 1.2.c. Survivors who blind or stun the killer at least once or hurt the feelings of the killer are no longer protected by the anti-camping. And finally, exemption 1.2.d. Meg Thomas is not protected by this provision. Provision 2.1. It is hereby prohibited to excessively teabag or taunt the killer. Again, this being said, the main provision does have several exemptions in which the main legal clause does not apply. First, we have exemption 2.2.a. Killers who break the anti-camping provision 1.1 are not protected from provision 2.1. 2.2.b. Survivors who reach the exit gates are no longer required to comply with provision 2.1 and may freely assert their dominance. 2.2.c. Survivors with loop play styles that possess flashlights are not to be held to the standards defined in the excessive teabag or taunt provision 2.1. 2.2.d. If a killer exists, this provision doesn't apply at all. The next provision is 3.1. It is hereby prohibited to tunnel a survivor. The first exemption is 3.2.a. Survivors who break the excessive teabag or taunting provision 2.1 are not protected from the anti-tunnel provision. 3.2.b. Hide and go seek play styles, on the other hand, completely nullifies the provision. 3.2.c. Meg Thomas is also not protected by this provision. 3.2.d. Survivors who perform conspicuous actions are not protected from the tunneling provision. Provision 4.1. It is hereby prohibited to strike a survivor whom is hanging on a hook. Much like the others, this also has its own set of exemptions. Exemption 4.2.a. Survivors who break the excessive teabag or taunting provision of 2.1 are not protected from provision 4.1. 4.2.b. Survivors who are screaming on the hook may be hit once just to stop the screaming. 4.2.c. Survivors that outplay a killer multiple times are not protected from provision 4.1 as the hit can be an acknowledgement of respect. 4.2.d. Survivors who aggressively blind.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And finally, exemption 4.2.e. Meg Thomas is also not protected from this provision. And the final rule of today's video is provision 5.1. It is hereby prohibited to rage quit a match. Now for the exemption. 5.2.a. Survivors who break provision 1 through provision 32, subsection A, B, B, A are not required to comply with this provision. 5.2.b. Any match that contains a hidden offering invalidates the main provision. 5.2.c. Any match that contains a map offering also invalidates this provision. And our last exemption of today's video, 5.2.d. Survivors and killers who get their feelings hurt are not required to comply with this provision. Alright guys, that's it for today. That's the first 5 unwritten rules. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, do whatever the hell you want. Don't let anybody tell you how to play your goddamn game that you spent money on. Have fun.